This is what I was trying to explain to you earlier about the project. It's like a warm hug for your soul, a gentle reminder that everything will be okay.
It's a journey, not a destination, so every step, even the small ones, should be celebrated along the way.
We're all here for the same thing, to make a difference.
So, what's the plan for this new project then?
Well, first we need to get the permits approved, then we can start the foundation.
The conditions are really good. I think the plants are getting enough sunlight, the soil is moist. We're doing a good job here.
So then I told him, you can't just expect things to happen.
I know, right?
You got to make your own luck.
So what were you saying about that book you were reading?
Oh, right. It was really interesting.
These look delicious. How much for this bag?
That will be $5, sir.
Did you sleep at all? Has the baby stirred? And when she said the baby slept late, he smiled like someone who had traded fortune for a heartbeat and had no regrets. The broth had been simmering for an hour, he said, to keep her strong, to keep the milk from thinning when fear crowded her ribs. He spoke of errands and measurements, of a wall that needed balancing and a beam that had to hold no matter how hard the rain hammered the roof. She listened while spooning the broth, the steam fogging the edge of her vision, and felt the ordinary comfort of being cared for by someone who knew the difference between pity and promise. Outside, the world was slick with recent storms. The road a dark ribbon that led to a sawmill, to a bridge site, to the restless places where men argued over wood lengths and delivery schedules and the shape of a future that never stayed still. He would be gone only an hour, he said. An hour felt small until it didn't. Plans blossomed like fragile flowers across the breakfast table. In a week, she would go down to the town for the doctor's check, and after that, they would buy blankets, a mattress, a curtain that could make the place feel less temporary. He wanted to buy new things, wanted the baby wrapped in the softness he'd never had. But she spoke of using old quilts because money was money, and birthdays came fast when you had a child like Han already at the edge of school. She said she could work a little, nothing heavy, just enough to set aside a few notes for a small cake and a candle. He shook his head in the way of a man who knew the worth of a back and the price of a mistake. And then he softened, because he also knew the power of a mother's stubborn love. Not heavy, he repeated. Promise me. She promised with eyes that had made too many promises. She promised with the spoon, setting it down like a signature. She promised with the same quiet fierceness that had kept her upright when the past clawed at the door and tried to pry away her sense of what was rightfully hers. She spoke of Han, almost 2, and the way a tiny mouth blows air like a storm at a candle flame. He said he would arrange it, the cake, the surprise, the little crown. She laughed then, a low sound that ached with relief and the impossibility of joy. And for a few breaths, the room felt like a harbor. No tide could pull away from shore. The baby slept, the broth steamed, and time allowed them to pretend it had a gentle heart. When he left, she stood in the doorway and watched him navigate the narrow path with the practiced care of someone who has learned to love while expecting to lose. The shack around her breathed old wood and honest labor. The yard was a tangle of wet grass and stubborn bricks that wouldn't lay right, that cut hands if you handled them like dreams instead of problems. She tidied the bowls and wiped the table twice, an extra measure against the sense that order was the only magic she could afford. Across the valley, the day wore a different face. The sawmill thrummed with the dull ache of machines, damp belts complaining when the rain crept too close. He walked along stacked lengths of imported forest wood, measuring with his eyes first and then with a ruler, finding the quiet lies that had slipped past less watchful men. The batch was short, he said, not angrily, but with a weariness that made the word land like a gavel. He told them to check every piece, to cut losses where rot had hollowed truth, to stop trusting the promise stamped on a bill of lading. He was fair and not forgiving. In places like this, fairness is mistaken for softness until it isn't. They spoke of bridges after wood, of the path to a shack that floods like a bad memory whenever the river decides to remember its old route. He visited the construction site and watched cement bricks line up like teeth, determined to bite down on erosion and win. The weather was a bully. The men were tired. Progress came in inches and washouts. He encouraged, recalibrated, pushed where it mattered and folded where it didn't, because he could hold two truths at once. People need grace, and bridges need standards. He left cans of water for men who wouldn't admit they were thirsty, and promised to return with better forecasts and stronger rope. On the drive away, the road felt longer than it should, as if distance itself had decided to test his resolve. Markets broke the afternoon into a clatter of voices and the bright sting of sliced fruit. Tieu Ca stood behind a modest spread of melons and smiled a vendor's smile that hid a mother's calculus. How many kilos to move before the light thinned? How many notes to tuck aside for a candle? How many favors to owe for a borrowed conical hat when the rain came sideways? People came. People bought. Some haggled because they didn't know any other way to talk to the world, and she forgave them because she understood that everyone negotiates their fear. She tucked coins into a pocket that needed too much and promised herself she would not count the bills until home, because counting on the roadside turns hope into a target. Between customers, she held the smaller baby and listened to Han chatter about birds that were not brave enough to land on a puddle and the way mud tries to steal shoes if you don't step quickly. The child's laughter sounded like a bell swallowed by a kite, bright and weightless. She kissed a damp forehead and told the story again, the one where a cake appears from an ordinary morning and a little hand blows out a flame that lights a doorway to better days. In the telling, she made the cake bigger and the flames softer, and she tucked away the detail that mattered most. She would make all of it true, even if she had to pay for truth with sleep. Evening stretched, the market thinned. Somewhere, thunder rehearsed behind a mountain. She packed the last of the melons for a man who liked them young and crisp, who said he would take the ugly ones as well if she knocked the price like a friend does for another friend. She agreed because kindness deserves a receipt. She borrowed a hat, returned a smile, and lifted the basket with a grit that surprised her own bones. She thought of his promise to arrange the birthday, to bring a small crown, and say something foolish that would make Han giggle into her palm, and she allowed herself a moment of reckless happiness. A life can turn on such moments, but a mother must believe in them anyway. At the shack, night worked its way into the corners. She laid the baby down and straightened the room that never seemed to stay straight. She told Han to sit in the doorway and count crickets while she herded the clucking confusion of chickens away from a patch of mud that smelled of trouble. The child listened and didn't, because childhood bends instructions into games. A minute became two. Two became a slice of forever. She set the broom against the wall and thought about new curtains, about the way fabric can make a window decide to be a promise, not a mouth. Far off, an engine growled, then quieted. Somewhere else, voices oiled by arrogance slid through a sawmill gate and asked the wrong questions about the right person. He declined a chair he didn't trust and registered a face he might need to remember later. Men like that never arrived alone, not even when they did. Their smiles were transactions. Their patience smelled like rain over rotten wood. He left before the meeting could turn into something other than a meeting, and on the walk to his truck, he tasted metal under his tongue and couldn't explain why. The past enjoys sending couriers with empty hands. Back at the shack, bedtime unspooled into a ritual of small promises. Han wanted a story about a bridge that didn't mind storms and a river that learned manners. The baby wanted the quiet rhythm of a heartbeat magnified by a mother's pulse. Tieu Ca wanted 10 unbroken minutes of a world that didn't threaten to tip. She gave the children everything she had, and then, because mothers are factories that refuse to close, she gave more. Outside, the dark sharpened, a knife eager to be chosen. She didn't notice at first how the silence had changed. He noticed. He turned off the engine before the house came into view and walked the last stretch, listening. The night said something he didn't like. A branch creaked without wind. Gravel forgot how to settle. He stood just beyond the doorway and waited until his breath found his body again. When he stepped inside, he smiled first so she wouldn't read the worry on his face, and then he locked the door because instincts are worth more than explanations. She read it anyway. Love is literacy. They spoke in low voices about the day, about the short wood and the good bricks and the bridge that would need a week of rainless days to catch up. He didn't say that certain men had remembered his name with too much ease. She didn't say that money sat warming in her pocket like a living thing that attracts predators. Instead, they stood at the baby's side and watched the rise and fall that proves the world is still possible. He reached for her hand and found it, steady and small and brave. She leaned into his shoulder and let the weight of the moment divide by two. Sleep should have come. It didn't. He lay awake and thought about tomorrow's errands, about fuel and wages, and how to stretch a day until it allows room for one more mercy. She lay awake and counted backward from too late, listening for Han's sigh, for a soft cough from the baby, for the small sounds that say everything is where it should be. A stray dog barked. The river complained to stones that never answer. Somewhere, a motorcycle ticked as its engine cooled. Fear rearranged the furniture of the mind and tried to convince it nothing had moved. When she finally drifted, the dream was simple: a cake, a candle, a circle of light that didn't flicker. She woke to the baby's hungry whimper and rose with the muscle memory of devotion. In the doorway, Han sat with her knees tucked up, humming to herself and counting monsters she insisted were only shadows with ambitions. Tieu Ca smiled and said, "You're safe here," and meant it every time she said it because mothers build safety with words when wood and locks are not enough. She didn't know, couldn't know, how often the world takes such sentences as a challenge instead of a prayer. Dawn came thin and uneasy again, but it came, and that in itself is a miracle no one notices until it stops. He brewed tea and burned his tongue because his mind was 2 steps ahead of his hands. She tasted sweetness and called it courage. They reviewed the day like soldiers review a map. Who would check the site, who would bring medicine, who would take Han to see the field where rice whispers when the wind asks a gentle question. He said an hour again. She said be careful again. They made a small ceremony out of goodbye, the kind that becomes armor when the day decides to unsheathe itself. When the door closed, the shack seemed to inhale. Tieu Ca dressed the children, then paused at the mirror because the face looking back at her wore more determination than sleep. She adjusted a strand of hair and thought of curtains again, of the way a new sheet brightens a room without asking for permission. She tucked the money deeper into a hidden seam and told herself she would add to it by noon. She promised a cake to the air because promises sound stronger when spoken, and the air promised nothing back because air never does. She lifted the baby, reached for Han's hand, and stepped into a morning that had no intention of being ordinary. The morning broke brittle, and Tieu Ca told herself to keep the world small, wash the bowls, hush the baby, tie Han's ribbon twice so it wouldn't slip. She set the broom by the door and stepped outside to scatter feed, thinking of a cake with a shy candle and a little crown made from cardboard and gold thread. The yard smelled of wet earth and papaya peel. Somewhere beyond the trees, an engine coughed like a secret clearing its throat. Han played in the doorway, singing to a line of bottle caps she called her parade. "Stay where I can see you," Tieu Ca said, and Han nodded with the solemn gravity of the almost two. The baby stirred, and she turned for one heartbeat, just one, toward the thin cry that means I'm here, I'm hungry, Don't forget me. The heartbeat passed. The house felt the smallest it had ever felt. The world took its chance. A shadow crossed the yard with a smile polished for courts and arguments. He spoke softly, the way danger sometimes does. Come with Dad, we'll buy a present, he coaxed, as if the word present were a key that fits every lock. The ribbon held. The bottle caps trembled. Small feet hesitated, then trusted. The parade lifted in a fist, and the doorway lost its soldier. Han? Tieu Ca called, half listening for the baby, half anything else. Silence offered its usual lie. She finished the bottle with one arm and wiped the table with the other, the practiced choreography of a woman who refuses to drop either care or order. Han, she called again, a little brighter, as if brightness could bribe fate. No answer. She stepped to the doorway and saw only the after-image of movement, the suggestion of a sleeve, the scuff of dust that says, "Hurry happened here." The broom clattered. Han! The name cracked like a dish on tile. She ran barefoot into the yard, the ground biting, her breath a saw blade. Han! She checked the chicken pen, the water jar, the banana tree where ribbons sometimes hide. No ribbon. She ran to the road, scanned left, right. The ditch held water and the promise of footprints. It kept only water. She sprinted back inside, checked the bed, the closet, the soft place under the table, where giggles usually betray the game. No giggles, only the baby, blinking at a world that had misplaced a sister. Neighbors heard her voice tear and came running with earnest hands and borrowed flashlights. A path appeared where none had been. Bent grass, a heel mark, the smear of a sandal dragged for a step and then lifted. Someone found a candy wrapper folded in the shape of persuasion. Someone else swore they'd seen a motorbike stutter past, carrying a bundle that jerked once and then went still. The road gave them gravel and nothing more. The sky hauled in weather and pretended to be busy. When the call reached Hung, he answered on the first ring. He was still dusty from the bridge site, sweat cooling into worry. "I'm coming," he said, and the steadiness in his voice built a scaffold beneath her legs. He arrived with a lantern and the kind of silence that means work first, fear later. He checked the yard like a surveyor, eyes taking the measure of every scuff, every broken stem, every lie the ground tried to tell. "She didn't walk out," he said softly. "She was carried." They fanned out along the lane, calling, listening, bargaining with a darkness that charged by the hour. At a fork, Hung knelt and found the ghost of a tire track veering toward the old bamboo grove, where the path thins and phones lose their nerve. "Here," he said, and there was movement in the word. Men with sticks, women with phones, a grandmother praying names in order of tenderness. Tieu Ca followed the track with her whole body, as if will alone could pull the world backward like a curtain. Rain arrived in a sudden sheet, punching the dust into mud, erasing what little the ground had left them. The track dissolved. The night took on that particular cruelty of weather that helps the one who runs and punishes the one who chases. "Please," she whispered to no one and everything. Her hands shook so hard the lantern rattled. The flame guttered, recovered, warned. Hung moved closer, a wall without edges. "We keep going," he said. "We don't stop at the place the rain chooses." They searched the grove, the culvert, the back trail that leads to the river's old scar. They found a scrap of ribbon caught on thorn, blue as a breath held too long. Tieu Ca pressed it to her lips and tasted dust, rain, the faint sweetness of a child who trusts too easily. She did not cry. Tears are a language for later. "Han!" she called again, and the bamboo answered with the small applause of leaves striking leaves. The river said nothing. The road, that expert witness, had already forgotten. Hours bled. Lanterns dimmed. The village thinned back to doorways and prayers. Hung walked her home, though home was a word with too many windows broken. The baby slept because babies must. The ribbon lay on the table like evidence in a trial where truth is expensive. He spoke quietly, each syllable sanded of panic. I'll go to the stations at first light. I'll talk to the checkpoints on the river road. I know who asks questions without being paid to. He did not say the other sentence out loud, the one about a man who used to share a roof and now shares an intention. Tieu Ca stood in the doorway Han had left, wind lifting the edge of the curtain like a hand that can't commit to comfort. She saw the cake that wasn't yet bought, the crown that hadn't been cut, the candle that would have trembled at a breath that now trembled somewhere else. She felt the fault line open in her chest and understood that a mother's heart is mapped like a country at war. Bridges to guard, borders to mark, names to keep alive by saying them in the dark. I won't stop, she said. Not to him, not to the night, but to the road itself. Hung nodded once, an oath sealed without flourish. We start again, at dawn. He set the lantern on the sill and stepped back into the wet black, a figure drawn by resolve and vanishing weather. The light made a small, stubborn circle. Inside it, the ribbon waited beside a bowl and a spoon. Outside it, the world reorganized into roots and rumors. Between the two stood Tieu Ca, sleepless and unbroken, teaching the darkness her daughter's name until the darkness learned to answer.